Welcome back to another deep dive. You know the drill by now. We have some interesting reading material, and we're going to break it all down for you today.
Always fun.
It is fun.
Yeah.
So today, we're going to be looking at the 2018 Farm Bill
Okay.
and its impact on cannabis. And this one might have you scratching your head a little bit because we're going to be exploring how this bill, which was often touted as a win for hemp, might actually be responsible for throwing up some roadblocks on the path to cannabis freedom.
Yeah, it really is fascinating how this bill could have been seen as so positive for agriculture and hemp in general. But at the same time, it might have had these sort of unforeseen consequences for cannabis.
Yeah, so let's break this down. When the 2018 Farm Bill passed, it felt like a huge victory, right? Hemp was federally legal, farmers were celebrating, businesses were popping up everywhere. It seemed like we were really taking a positive step forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, the devil's in the details. And the way the bill was written with its vague language and all those loopholes might have actually been a way to just muddy the waters and cause more confusion in the market rather than actually, liberating cannabis.
So that's where things kind of take a turn, right?
Mhm.
All of a sudden you had all these intoxicating hemp derivatives popping up on the market, like Delta-8 THC, all these things that people hadn't really heard of before.
Right. And those derivatives, they fall under that broad definition of hemp that the Farm Bill provides. But they can have these really high THC levels, way more than what people traditionally associate with hemp. And the bill just didn't really do a good job of addressing concerns about product safety or, the integrity of that natural cannabis.
So it sounds like what you're saying is the 2018 Farm Bill might have inadvertently paved the way for this market that's full of products that could be really misleading to consumers when it comes to potency.
Exactly. Consumers might be getting way more than they bargained for. And a lot of these products are untested, so they could contain all sorts of harmful substances like pesticides, heavy metals. It raises a lot of red flags when it comes to consumer safety.
It sounds like the Farm Bill might have opened a bit of a Pandora's box here.
Yeah.
And now everybody's kind of scrambling to figure out how to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, in a way it did. It created this situation where, because the bill was so vague and open to interpretation, it led to this patchwork of state-level regulations with each state trying to tackle this issue in their own way.
Which brings us to our next point. How have states responded to this whole federal ambiguity?
Well, some states, particularly those that are maybe a little more concerned about public health and the lack of regulation when it comes to these hemp-derived products, they've really taken a hard line and just gone for outright bans on certain products, like Delta-8 THC, for example.
So are these state-level regulations a step in the right direction, or are they creating even more problems than they're solving?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
While they're often presented as, these measures to protect the public, it's possible that they're actually just creating more confusion and inconsistency across the board.
Yeah, it's almost like we took one step forward and then two steps back.
In a way.
Did the 2018 Farm Bill, instead of really supporting natural cannabis, actually lay the groundwork for more control and more regulation?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? Some folks theorize that this whole, this influx of these potentially questionable products was intentional. It was almost a tactic to justify even stricter regulations on all types of cannabis, including those natural forms.
It's a cynical view, but it does make you wonder.
It does.
It's like they're saying, see, we told you cannabis was dangerous. When in reality, the issue might be this lack of proper regulation and oversight.
Exactly. And now we have this new Senate Farm Bill draft that's supposed to fix all the issues caused by the 2018 version. But when you really look at it, some of the proposed changes might actually make things worse.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's dive into this new draft bill and try to figure out what's really at stake here. What are some of the key changes they're proposing, and how could these changes affect the future of cannabis?
All right, well, buckle up. So one of the biggest changes they're proposing in this new draft is how they define hemp. They want to base it on total THC levels, which, on the surface sounds pretty straightforward, but it could actually create even more confusion down the line.
Yeah, I could see how that could be an issue. Can you sort of break that down for us?
Sure. So basically, they want to include THCA Delta-9 and any other cannabinoids that can convert into THC when they're calculating those total THC levels.
Okay.
So a product that tests below the legal limit initially could end up exceeding it later on, depending on how it's stored or how it's processed.
So what you're saying is a product could become illegal over time, even if it was totally compliant when it was first made.
Exactly. It's like compliance becomes this moving target.
Right.
And it just makes things incredibly difficult for producers to manage and for consumers to understand.
For sure. And you mentioned earlier that the new draft also proposes this two-tiered licensing system. What's the rationale behind that, and how could it affect smaller growers who are already facing a lot of challenges?
Well, they're making a distinction between what they're calling industrial hemp producers and general hemp producers. So the industrial hemp folks would face less stringent testing requirements, but only if they're using certified seeds and operating in states with USDA-approved hemp plans.
So it seems like this could streamline things for bigger companies that already have those resources in place, but it could create some serious roadblocks for smaller growers who maybe can't afford to meet all those requirements.
Yeah, that's a big concern.
Right.
Larger companies are much more likely to have access to those certified seeds and the infrastructure to deal with all these, complicated regulations. Smaller independent growers, they could be left at a real disadvantage. It could really hinder their ability to compete in the market.
It sounds like this bill is kind of setting up a system that favors those big players and could end up pushing smaller producers out of the picture entirely, which doesn't really sound like it's in the spirit of creating a diverse and competitive cannabis market.
That's a valid point. And then on top of all that, we haven't even talked about the proposed restrictions on cannabinoid resin production, which would make it even harder to produce natural cannabis products from hemp.
Okay, hold on. Let's back up a little bit. For those of us who aren't cannabis chemists, can you explain what cannabinoid resin is and why those restrictions are so significant?
Sure. So cannabinoid resin is basically that natural extract from the cannabis plant.
Okay.
It's where you find those beneficial compounds like CBD and THC. And the draft bill is proposing to really restrict the production of this resin, which could severely limit the creation of those natural cannabis products.
So if they're restricting the production of natural cannabis products, doesn't that create a situation where those synthetic derivatives have a competitive advantage?
You could definitely see it that way. It raises questions about whether these regulations are really about consumer safety or if there might be, other motives at play.
It's concerning that a bill that's supposed to be fixing the problems created by the 2018 Farm Bill might actually be making them worse and, further consolidating corporate control over the cannabis industry.
Definitely some red flags there. The 2018 Farm Bill, despite its initial promise, it seems like it really paved the way for this trend of corporate dominance in the cannabis market. And this new draft could be taking us even further down that road. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about what's happening at the state level, because things aren't exactly simple there either.
It's amazing to me how each state is kind of left to deal with this federal ambiguity around cannabis. It's like they're all playing a different game with different rule books, and it just creates so much confusion.
Yeah, it's a real patchwork of regulations out there. Some states are especially worried about the lack of regulation and testing for these hemp-derived products, so they've taken a really strict approach, like banning products like Delta-8 THC completely.
And on the surface, that sounds like it's all about protecting consumers. But is it really that simple?
Well, the problem is these bans, they often lump all hemp-derived cannabinoids together, even the ones that have a pretty good safety record. And they don't always make a clear distinction between natural cannabis and the stuff that's been, chemically synthesized in a lab.
So it's kind of like a one-size-fits-all approach that could end up punishing producers and consumers who are actually doing things the right way.
Right. And then you have other states that are trying to regulate these products. But they all have these different testing standards and labeling requirements and bureaucratic hurdles. It makes it almost impossible for businesses to operate across state lines.
It seems like the more they try to regulate, the more complicated and confusing it gets. And I wouldn't be surprised if that complexity ends up benefiting the bigger corporations that have the resources to navigate all these legal mazes.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. Smaller businesses often just don't have the money or the manpower to keep up with all these constantly changing regulations and legal challenges. And then there's the whole issue of enforcement. Some states are imposing these really harsh penalties for even minor violations, which can really hurt small growers and independent producers.
So we've got this confusing mix of regulations at the state level and a federal government that seems to be taking 2 steps back for every 1 step forward. So what can we as individuals do to advocate for a more sensible and equitable approach to cannabis?
Well, I think it starts with education. Knowledge is power, right? So understand the laws in your state. Familiarize yourself with the differences between natural cannabis and those synthetic derivatives. And be wary of products that sound too good to be true.
It's like anything else. Be an informed consumer. Don't just blindly trust what you hear or see.
Exactly. And get involved in the political process. Contact your representatives. Support candidates who align with your views on cannabis. And speak up about the issues that matter to you.
There's strength in numbers, right? So join a local advocacy group. Attend a town hall meeting. Write a letter to your representative. Every little action can make a difference.
Absolutely. And remember, this isn't just about cannabis. It's about our personal freedom, our right to make choices about our own bodies and well-being, and our ability to access the benefits of a plant that's been used safely and responsibly for centuries.
It's about pushing back against these outdated and often unjust regulations that restrict our access to natural remedies and hinder the growth of an industry with so much potential.
Well said. So to all our listeners out there, stay informed, stay engaged, and don't be afraid to raise your voice. The future of cannabis and the freedoms that come with it depend on us working together to make a change.
Beautifully put. This has been a fascinating deep dive into the complex world of cannabis regulation. It's clear that the fight for cannabis freedom is far from over. But with knowledge, awareness, and persistent action, we can create a future where this plant is treated with the respect and understanding it deserves. So until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.